Hello everyone. In this complete series on 43 thinkers who shaped human history, part 1 of this video featured the first 22. Today's video will present you the next 21. Please continue listening and follow along. 23. John Stuart Mill. John Stuart Mill, born May 20th, 1806, died May 8th, 1873, was one of the most important British philosophers and political economists of the 19th century, notable for his liberal ideas and for perfecting the theory of utilitarianism, laying the foundation for modern liberal democratic values. He was one of the central figures of classical liberalism and Western moral philosophy, having a lasting influence on politics, ethics, and social sciences. Mill was born in London and educated almost entirely by his father, James Mill, a philosopher and close colleague of Jeremy Bentham, the founder of utilitarianism. From a young age, he was exposed to classical Greek and Roman texts, mathematics, logic, and philosophy, becoming one of the most outstanding minds of his time. Mill's thought was built on the foundation of utilitarianism, the moral notion that the right action is the one that brings the greatest happiness to the greatest number of people. However, he did not apply this principle mechanically like Bentham, but expanded it by distinguishing between higher and lower pleasures. Intellectual and spiritual pleasures are more valuable than physical pleasures, and a good life requires the pursuit of more complex sources of happiness. One of Mill's iconic contributions is his work On Liberty, 1859, a profound argument about individual liberty and the limits of state power. He proposed the famous principle known as the principle of harm. Only when one person's actions harm another is society permitted to intervene. Mill emphasized that freedom of speech, freedom of thought, and individual liberty are prerequisites for self-development and for the pursuit of truth, and for preventing tyranny of the majority, a situation where popular opinion is imposed on a minority simply because the majority holds power. Mill was also the author of The Subjection of Women, 1869, a pioneering treatise on women's rights and gender equality, in which he argued that inequality between men and women is not only unjust, but also hinders social progress. He believed that empowering women equally would promote overall well-being and human progress. In the field of logic and cognition, Mill's A System of Logic, 1843, was a significant contribution to the philosophy of science, presenting the methods of inference, Mill's methods, to analyze cause and effect relationships in science and rational thinking. This book had a profound influence on later scientific methodology. Mill also wrote about representative politics in Considerations on Representative Government, 1861, in which he argued that representative bodies should not only serve the legislative process, but also be forums for public debate and oversight of policy implementation, affirming the necessity of multifaceted debate in democracy. Overall, Mill was a multifaceted thinker. He combined utilitarianism, individual liberty,
gender equality, and logical analysis into a consistent ideology that promoted a free and civilized society. His ideas continue to be central to debate in modern political and ethical philosophy, particularly regarding the limits of state power, individual liberty, and the goals of public policy.
'24. Abraham Lincoln, 1809 to 1865. Abraham Lincoln, also known as the Honest Abe or the Great Emancipator, was one of the most important figures in American history. He was the man who preserved the Union, abolished slavery, and laid the foundation for the modernization of the national economy. Abraham Lincoln, born February 12, 1809, died April 15, 1865, was the 16th President of the United States and one of the most influential figures in American history. He is widely known for his leadership of the country during the American Civil War, 1861 to 1865, and for pioneering the abolition of slavery in the United States. Lincoln was born into a poor farming family in Hardin County, Kentucky, and grew up in extremely difficult circumstances. Lincoln received little formal education, but through self-study and a love of reading, he developed a sharp intellect and extensive knowledge. Before entering politics, he worked as a carpenter and a boatman on the river, and later self-taught himself law to become a lawyer. His self-taught spirit and understanding of the law helped him emerge as a sharp-witted orator. Lincoln began his political career in Illinois when he was elected to the State House of Representatives and later to the United States House of Representatives. He was a member of the newly formed Republican Party, which opposed the expansion of slavery into the Western territories. Although he served only one term in Congress, Lincoln quickly became a prominent figure in the anti-slavery movement. In 1860, Lincoln was elected President of the United States amidst a deep crisis concerning slavery and state rights. Immediately after his election, many Southern states seceded from the Union and formed the Confederacy, leading to the outbreak of the Civil War. Lincoln argued that the Union had to remain intact and that any secession would violate the U.S. Constitution. Throughout the war, Lincoln demonstrated unwavering leadership. He replaced many generals before finding an effective commander in Ulysses S. Grant, and he remained steadfast in his pursuit of victory. Lincoln was not only the commander-in-chief of the Army, but also a key figure in shaping political strategy, understanding that ending slavery was essential to the nation's stability. A major turning point in this journey was the Emancipation Proclamation, issued on January 1, 1863, declaring all slaves in the rebellious states free. This decision did not immediately free all slaves, but it transformed the war from a territorial struggle into a fight for human rights. It also paved the way for the abolition of slavery nationwide. Lincoln also pushed Congress to pass the 13th Amendment, officially abolishing slavery throughout the United States. This was a historic turning point in the nation's progress toward democracy and human rights. On April 9, 1865, as the Union forces were nearing victory, Lincoln went to Appomattox Courthouse to celebrate the end of the war. However, just days later, on April 14, 1865, he was assassinated by John Wilkes Booth, an actor and Confederate supporter, at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. Lincoln died on April 15th, leaving behind great grief and a legacy that transcends time. Lincoln's legacy lies not only in preserving a unified America or abolishing slavery, but also in the spirit of democracy, human rights that he instilled and demonstrated throughout his life. Speeches like the Gettysburg Address, with their concise yet profound pronouncements on liberty and equality, remain among the most iconic political and literary texts of the United States and the world. Abraham Lincoln is remembered as a steadfast leader during the Civil War, a profound social reformer, and the founder of a more united and equitable America, making him an icon of modern democratic ideals. Abraham Lincoln is proof that perseverance and integrity can change the destiny of a nation. He transformed the pain of a fratricidal war into an opportunity for America to truly live up to its ideals of freedom.
Charles Darwin, 1809 to 1882. Charles Darwin, born February 12, 1809, died 1882, is remembered not only as a great naturalist, but also as a symbol of the intellectual revolution. The commemoration of Charles Darwin began during his lifetime and continues long after his death, largely due to the profound influence of the evolutionary ideas he founded. Darwin's name and his significant contributions are commemorated by numerous geographical signs, species names, organizations, cultural and scientific events, awards, and public symbols, as well as holidays around the world. Even during his voyages with the HMS Beagle, many places were named after Darwin. For example, a stretch of water near the Beagle Channel was named Darwin Sound because Darwin helped save the expedition from losing the ship. Mount Darwin in the Andes was named on the occasion of his 25th birthday. Many other places, including a Darwin Sound in Canada or Port Darwin in Australia, also bear his name as a way of remembering his lasting influence on science and geographical discovery. In biology, more than 300 species, 9 genera, and several larger taxonomic units bear the name Darwin or the form Darwinii or Darwini in his honor. Some notable examples include the Darwinian ostrich, Rhea darwinii, and the Darwinian frog, Rhinoderma darwini, both of which have research origins linked to his Beagle voyage. In 2009, on the occasion of Darwin's 200th birthday, a 47-million-year-old primate fossil was named Darwinius to commemorate his importance in evolutionary history.
2009 was a major milestone in commemorating Darwin. Anniversaries included the bicentenary, 200th anniversary of his birth, and the 150th anniversary of the publication of On the Origin of Species, his foundational work. Exhibitions, festivals, and events were held at many major museums, such as in London, New York, Chicago, and Toronto. Special film and television programs, commemorative activities at his birthplace in Shrewsbury, and even the release of commemorative postage stamps and coins throughout the United Kingdom. Darwin is also commemorated in works of art, novels, and films, ensuring that his image and story continue to inspire the public. From monuments to documentaries and appearances in television series, his cultural presence extends beyond the scientific realm, demonstrating the profound social influence of Darwinian thought across generations. The commemoration and celebration of Charles Darwin is not limited to scientific titles, but also includes international events, educational organizations, popular culture, and global landmarks, reflecting his pivotal role in shaping our modern understanding of life on Earth. His legacy reminds us that it is not the strongest or the most intelligent that survives, but the one best able to adapt to change.
At the institutional and community level, many organizations and places bear Darwin's name. In Australia, there is Charles Darwin University and Charles Darwin National Park. In Cambridge, England, Darwin College is named in honor of the Darwin family. In the Galapagos Islands, the Charles Darwin Foundation and the Charles Darwin Research Station are active in the study and conservation of biodiversity, associating his name with the place that led him to his observations and theoretical work on evolution. Darwin is also honored with awards and medals. The Linnean Society of London has awarded him the Darwin Wallace Medal since 1908 in recognition of his groundbreaking contributions to evolutionary biology. In addition, numerous scientific conferences and academic programs are held around the world to discuss his legacy and update on the progress made in Darwin's thought. An important part of celebrating Darwin is through public events. Darwin Day, celebrated annually on February 12th, his birthday, has become a traditional international day to honor Darwin's life and his contributions to science in general, and especially to the theory of evolution. This event includes workshops, exhibitions, academic debates, and numerous educational activities held around the world to raise awareness of science.
26. Soren Kierkegaard, 1813 to 1855. Soren Abbe Kierkegaard was born May 5, 1813, died November 11, 1855, was a Danish philosopher, theologian, poet, and social critic who lived in the 19th century, considered the founder of existentialism, a philosophical school that emphasized the existence of each individual, free choice, and personal responsibility, rather than the abstract and objective philosophical systems that dominated Europe at the time. Kierkegaard was born in Copenhagen, Denmark, into a well-to-do but emotionally complex family. His father was a deeply devout man with many inner obsessions. His family environment and childhood experiences profoundly shaped his later thoughts on sin, anxiety, and the relationship between the individual and God.
Kierkegaard initially studied theology at the University of Copenhagen, but he gradually shifted his focus to philosophy and literature. He completed his doctoral dissertation on the concept of irony, with constant references to Socrates, demonstrating a desire to return thinking to concrete human beings rather than abstract systems of reasoning. One distinctive feature of Kierkegaard's philosophy is his strong critique of Hegelian philosophy and all forms of overly abstract propositional reasoning, arguing that such systems distort human reality and obscure vivid, concrete personal experience. He believed that abstract reason could not solve the powerful, tragic, and absurd problems inherent in human life. Kierkegaard was particularly interested in personal truth, that is, truth that each person must live rather than merely perceive. Therefore, he emphasized the importance of free choice, personal commitment, and confronting anxiety, something unavoidable if one wants to be oneself. This differs from philosophies focused on theory and systems, as Kierkegaard viewed each individual as the starting point for philosophy.
A famous concept of his is the leap of faith, the idea that believing in God or something beyond reason requires a decisive personal decision, even if it cannot be proven by pure reasoning. He saw this as a courageous act of confronting contradiction, absurdity, and risk in order to seek deeper personal truth. Kierkegaard's philosophy also explores profound psychological aspects such as despair, guilt, loneliness, and the challenges of spiritual life. He believed that each individual must take responsibility for their own choices, unable to hide behind social norms or conventional explanations. This perspective made him one of the pioneers of existential philosophy and existential psychology. During his lifetime, Kierkegaard published many major works using pseudonyms and diverse writing styles, aiming to provoke and challenge readers to reflect for themselves. Representative works include Either Or, Fear and Trembling, and The Sickness unto Death, each exploring different aspects of spiritual life, ethics, and faith. Although his life did not receive widespread attention outside of Denmark, Kierkegaard's ideas later had a profound influence on 20th century philosophers such as Martin Heidegger, Jean-Paul Sartre, Karl Jaspers, and Martin Buber, and also deeply impacted modern Protestant theology. Søren Kierkegaard was a philosopher who differed from the systematics tradition. He placed the individual, freedom, choice, and intrinsic responsibility at the center of human existence, paving the way for existential philosophy and profound individual thinking in modern philosophy.
27. Henry David Thoreau, 1817 to 1862. Henry David Thoreau, born July 12, 1817, died May 6, 1862, was an American writer, philosopher, naturalist, poet, and social activist, considered one of the leading voices of transcendentalism. He was renowned for his simple lifestyle and nonviolent resistance in the 19th century, and was a lasting inspiration for later socio-political and environmental movements.
His ideas inspired many great world leaders, such as Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King, Jr. Thoreau was born in Concord, Massachusetts, into a well-off family with a tradition of academic interest. He studied at Harvard College, where he was exposed to many advanced philosophical and cultural ideas, but he later refused to pursue a long-term career in traditional fields such as law, education, or business. Instead, he devoted much of his life to studying nature, writing, and practicing the principles of life he championed. He became best known for two iconic works, Walden, or Life in the Woods, 1854, and the essay Civil Disobedience, 1849. In Walden, Thoreau recounts his 2 years and 2 months of independent living on the shores of Walden Pond, where he built a small hut and self-sufficiently cultivated, worked, and contemplated the nature of life and nature. His aim was to live simply, connect directly with nature, and redefine what was truly necessary in life, transcending material concerns and social pressures. Walden is both a memoir of a life lived in close proximity to nature and a philosophical work on labor, autonomy, individuality, and the meaning of life.
The essay Civil Disobedience is one of Thoreau's most influential writings. In it, he develops the argument that conscience must take precedence over law when the government acts wrongly. He advocates for the citizen's right to refuse to obey unjust laws, especially those related to slavery and war. This idea has profoundly inspired peace and human rights movements in the 20th century and has been used by activists such as Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King, Jr. as a guiding principle for nonviolent struggle. Thoreau was not only a philosophical writer, but also a keen observer of nature. He wrote extensively on natural history, made field observations, and kept numerous records even before disciplines such as ecology and environmental science were established. With a literary style that interwoven natural observation, personal experience, and profound logic, he contributed to laying the foundation for nature writing. Thoreau also strongly advocated for the abolition of slavery, participated in speeches, and stood up for those who were treated unjustly. He often criticized consumer society and industrialization and warned against alienation from nature and spiritual values. Thoreau died in 1862 at the age of 44, but his ideas and works continue to have a wide-ranging influence in the fields of ethics, politics, the environment, and culture. He's considered one of the first voices against a materialistic lifestyle, while simultaneously celebrating individual liberty, a free conscience, and a connection with nature, values that remain highly relevant in today's world. He once wrote, "Most people live a life of silent despair, and he chose to live the opposite way in order to awaken the conscience of humanity."
28. Karl Marx, 1818 to 1883. Karl Heinrich Marx, born May 5, 1818, died March 14, 1883, was one of the most influential thinkers in modern history. He was a German philosopher, economist, historian, sociologist, political theorist, journalist, and revolutionary,
best known for developing Marxist theory and contributing to the formation of scientific communism, a doctrine that profoundly impacted politics, society, and thought in the 19th, 20th, and later centuries. Marx was born in Trier, in the Prussian region of Germany, into a middle-class family with an academic tradition. He studied law and philosophy at universities in Bonn and Berlin, where he was exposed to the philosophies of Hegel and other thinkers. His initial ideas were influenced by Hegel, but Marx gradually criticized and shifted towards materialism, that is, considering material and economic conditions as the foundation that determines the structure of society and human consciousness, in contrast to the idealist view that consciousness is the root. In the early years of his career, Marx worked as a journalist and political theorist in Cologne and Paris, where he met Friedrich Engels, his lifelong friend, collaborator, and co-author of many important works. Marx was expelled from France by radical political activities and moved to Brussels, where he and Engels developed many theories and published some of his first works.
One of Marx's most representative and influential works is the Communist Manifesto, published in 1848 with Engels. This work clearly outlines the view that history is the history of class struggle, from the struggle between serfs and landowners to the bourgeois and proletarian eras, and that the working class, proletariat, must unite to overthrow capitalism and establish a classless society. Another major work by Marx is Capital, Das Kapital, first published in 1867, a profound analysis of the economic mechanisms of capitalism. In it, he presents concepts such as surplus value, exploited labor, and how capital expands profits through the exploitation of labor. Marx argued that in the capitalist system, workers create value but do not receive the full value. A large portion is appropriated by the capitalist owners in the form of profit. Marx also developed the dialectical materialism and historical materialism method, an approach to social analysis based on the inherent contradictions of the forces of production and relations of production, viewing historical change as a result of class conflict and contradictions within the economic mechanism. According to him, when these contradictions become too great, a revolution to replace the old regime with a more progressive social form is inevitable, in this case a classless society with capitalist private property. Marx spent much of his later life in exile in London, often facing financial hardship and relying on Engels for support. Yet he continued to write and research until his death. Marx's ideas not only greatly influenced the workers' movement and communist parties worldwide, but also extended to many academic fields such as sociology, economics, philosophy, history, and political science. Concepts such as exploitation, social stratification, and ideology remain important analytical tools in modern social science. Marx's intellectual legacy is a global one, received, debated, criticized, and transformed in a multitude of historical contexts. His influence has supported movements for labor rights, social equality, and structural changes in power, while also sparking debate throughout the 20th century regarding the application of his theory to political practice in many countries.
29. Walt Whitman, 1819 to 1892. Walt Whitman, born 1819, died 1892, was an American poet, journalist, and writer, considered one of the most influential figures in American and world literary history, particularly for his pioneering role in the development of free verse, a poetic form that does not adhere to traditional rhythm and rhyme. He blurred the lines between transcendence and realism, bringing a breath of fresh air to world poetry with his free and humanistic writing style. Whitman was born Walter Whitman, Jr. on May 31, 1919, in West Hills, Long Island, New York. He grew up in Brooklyn, where his family moved when he was a child. Whitman had a limited formal education and began working very early, apprenticed in printing at age 12, and later working as a printer, teacher, and journalist for various newspapers in New York and New Orleans. Throughout the 1840s and early 1850s, Whitman continued to write and search for a new poetic style. His thinking was influenced by both transcendentalism and realism, evident in his exploration of human nature, individual liberty, democracy, and nature through straightforward, powerful, and vivid language. Whitman's most notable and important work is Leaves of Grass, a collection of poems he first self-published in 1855 with his own money. The first edition contained 12 untitled poems, including famous ones such as Song of Myself. Whitman continued to expand and revise this collection through subsequent editions, each adding new poems and delving deeper into themes such as the body, soul, love, sexuality, and the relationship between the individual and society at large.
From its inception, Leaves of Grass was considered controversial due to its unconventional style and direct descriptions of emotions, the body, and sexuality, including allusions to same-sex feelings, rare in the literature of the time. However, the work was highly praised by Ralph Waldo Emerson as a masterpiece of intellect and wisdom, despite its initial lack of widespread acceptance. Whitman's poetic style, particularly in Leaves of Grass, explores the relationship between the individual and the community, viewing the human being both an independent individual and part of a larger being. He celebrated the beauty of the human body and soul, emphasizing the balance between individual freedom, social cohesion, and American democratic ideals, and believed that poetry could fully reflect life experiences and national identity. When the American Civil War broke out in the 1960s, Whitman moved to Washington, D.C., and volunteered to care for wounded soldiers in hospitals. This emotionally rich experience profoundly influenced his war poems, such as those in the collection Drum Taps, 1865, and later in his tributes to President Abraham Lincoln, such as O Captain, My Captain, and When Lilacs Last in the Dooryard. He also wrote many poems about wartime life and profound experiences in Specimen Days and Collect.
Later in his life, Whitman continued to revise and expand Leaves of Grass. Although initially unpopular, he gradually came to be recognized as one of America's greatest poets.
his influence extending into the 20th and 21st centuries in poetic thought and style. Whitman's language, themes, and style have inspired generations of poets, and he is regarded as an icon of modern poetry and the spirit of individual freedom. Whitman died on March 26, 1892, in Camden, New Jersey, leaving behind a vast literary legacy that is still studied, translated into many languages, and cherished by readers worldwide. Walt Whitman once said, "I contain crowds." He embodied the American spirit, a spirit that yearned for freedom, innovation, and absolute empathy. 30. Friedrich Engels, 1820 to 1895. Friedrich Engels, born November 28, 1820, died August 5, 1895, was a 19th-century German thinker, political theorist, philosopher, revolutionary, and social activist, best known for his role alongside Karl Marx in founding and developing scientific communism, Marxism, one of the most influential ideologies in modern history. Engels was born in Barmen, now Wuppertal, Germany, into a family of textile merchants. Although raised in a wealthy environment and within a family business tradition, he soon displayed a critical mind for society and politics, devoting much time to reading and reflecting on contemporary issues. Engels continued his education at schools in Elberfeld and, as a child, worked in his family's business to learn management and business, but he still devoted much of his time to pursuing political and philosophical writings. During the years 1837 to 1842, Engels lived in various places such as Bremen, Berlin, and Manchester, where he was deeply exposed to the social realities of the Industrial Revolution and the new economic relations. Particularly while working in Manchester, the industrial center of England, Engels directly observed the harsh living and working conditions of the workers, which he described in detail in his famous work, The Condition of the Working Class in England, published in 1845. This work is one of the earliest and most profound studies of industrial society, marking the beginning of Engels' thought transitioning from social criticism to revolutionary theory.
In 1844, Engels met Karl Marx in Paris, and from then on, the two began a deep and lifelong collaborative relationship. Together, they developed the fundamental principles of scientific socialism, based on a synthesis of dialectical materialism and political economy critique, particularly analyzing the relationship between private property, labor, and social inequality. Together with Marx, Engels wrote the Communist Manifesto, published in 1848, one of the world's most influential intellectual documents, presenting the view that history is the history of class struggle and calling for proletarian unity to change society. In their division of labor, Engels is often seen as the outstanding theorist with profound economic analyses, while Engels was the editor, disseminating ideas and conveying them to a wider audience. He edited and completed volumes 2 and 3 of Das Kapital after Marx's death, based on Marx's manuscripts and notes,
thus completing this important body of Marxist thought. He was also the principal author of important theoretical works such as Anti-Dühring and Socialism, Utopian and Scientific, interpreting and systematizing Marxist thought into more accessible arguments for the international revolutionary movement.
Engels also wrote many other works related to social history, the origins of the family, private and state property, which expanded the Marxist perspective into the fields of sociology and anthropology. These works influenced later studies on the family, gender, and social structure. After Marx's death in 1883, Engels devoted much of his remaining time to editing and preserving Marx's intellectual legacy while continuing to promote the international workers' movement. He lived in London and remained active in international organizations such as the Workers' International. Engels died on August 5, 1995, in London, but his ideas continued to form the foundation for revolutionary movements and studies on society, politics, and economics throughout the 20th century and beyond. According to his will, his ashes were scattered at sea to maintain maximum privacy. His name is forever associated with Marx as a symbol of erudition, loyalty, and dedication to the cause of human liberation. Engels proved that an intellect from the bourgeoisie could still be the most steadfast defender of workers' rights. His humility and foresight are what made him such a great figure.
31. Fyodor Dostoevsky, 1821 to 1881. Fyodor Mikhailovich Dostoevsky, born November 11, 1821, died February 9, 1881, was a major novelist, writer, and thinker of 19th-century Russian literature, considered along with Lev Tolstoy as one of the two greatest Russian literary giants. He is renowned for his works of profound psychological depth, exploring the human psyche and raising fundamental questions about morality, freedom, sin, faith, and the nature of society. Dostoevsky is also considered one of the pioneers who influenced existentialism and later modern literature. Dostoevsky was born in Moscow, Russia, into a relatively well-off family. His father was a military doctor, and his mother was the daughter of a merchant. His childhood witnessed many scenes of poverty and suffering in the neighborhood where his family lived, leaving a deep impression on his soul, and later reflected in many works about the underprivileged, oppressed, or misguided in society. Initially, Dostoevsky studied at the Nikolaev Military Engineering Academy in St. Petersburg and worked as an engineer. However, his passion for literature soon led him to pursue a writing career. He became famous with the novel Poor Folk, 1846, a work that focuses on the suffering of the lower classes and the impact of poverty on human psychology. However, Dostoevsky's life was not without its harsh trials. He became involved with a group of intellectuals with radical views and was arrested by the Russian authorities in 1849. Initially sentenced to death, the execution was postponed at the last minute, and he was exiled to perform hard labor for many years in Siberia. That experience, along with the epilepsy he suffered, deepened his religious beliefs and his perspective on suffering, salvation, and human destiny in his later works.
After returning from Siberia, Dostoevsky entered his most prolific and classic period of writing. He founded and wrote for several magazines, such as Vremya and Epoka, expanding his influence both literarily and socially. He opposed radicalism and philosophical materialism, emphasizing individual freedom, moral responsibility, and the relationship between faith and reason in human life. Among Dostoevsky's important works, the most notable is Notes from the Underground, 1864, a fictional essay that opened up a perspective on the complex human being, the conflict between freedom and social reason. Crime and Punishment, 1866, revolves around the psychology of a student who falls into crime and his journey of confronting his conscience. The Idiot, 1868-69, the story of a kind and sincere person in a complex society. Demons, 1872, a critique of extremism and political violence. The Brothers Karamazov, 1879-80, the pinnacle of his career, raising profound questions about crime, faith, freedom, and morality through the fates of three brothers with differing life perspectives.
Dostoevsky's works often explore psychology, personal conflicts, loneliness, anxiety, and the struggle for meaning in life, making them relatable and deeply meaningful to readers across generations. He not only depicted the social context of 19th century Russia, but also raised global and timeless questions. How can people confront sin, take responsibility for their choices, and seek forgiveness or salvation? Dostoevsky died on February 9, 1881, in St. Petersburg, but his legacy lives on as one of the greatest writers in world literature, profoundly influencing literature, philosophy, and psychology throughout the 20th century and continuing to be widely read and studied today. His works have inspired great minds such as Friedrich Nietzsche, Sigmund Freud, Jean-Paul Sartre, and Albert Camus. Dostoevsky once said, "Beauty will save the world." Through his poignant writings, he showed us that even in the darkest corners of sin, humanity still yearns for the light of goodness.
32. Lev Tolstoy, 1828-1910. Lev Nikolaevich Tolstoy, born September 9, 1828, at Yasnaya Polyana Manor, Tula Province, Russia, was one of the greatest writers in world literary history, notable for masterpieces such as War and Peace and Anna Karenina. He was born into an old Russian aristocratic family with a long lineage and scholarly tradition. The Tolstoy family originally bore the surname Dick and later changed to the Russian name Tolstoy when they emigrated to Muscovy in the 17th century. His family had produced influential figures in Russian history, but his father, Count Nikolai Ilyich Tolstoy, although a former honorary officer in the war, left behind a fortune that was almost bankrupt when Lev was young. His mother, Maria Ivanovna Volkonskaya, was described as gentle, evocative, and a gifted storyteller, qualities that later greatly influenced Tolstoy's writing style.
Lev Nikolaevich Tolstoy was not merely a writer. He was a natural force in Russian literature, a moral reformer whose influence transcended national borders to reach the conscience of all humanity. Tolstoy lost both his parents at a young age. His mother died when he was 3 and his father when he was 9, leaving a profound impact on his young mind. He later recorded these childhood memories in his work Childhood, Детство, where he expressed his initial impressions of freedom, suffering, and self-awareness, elements that later became the spiritual material in many of his stories.
Tolstoy's childhood was caught between two opposing forces. On the one hand, the aristocracy with its upper-class lifestyle, and on the other, a concern for the real lives of the lower classes. After his family moved to Moscow and then returned to Yasnaya Polyana following his father's death, Tolstoy received an unusual home education. Nature, working life, and the stories of those around him were more practical forms of learning than formal schooling. He was known for his intelligence, but also for his proud temperament, sometimes isolating himself from his peers, and from a very early age he displayed a contempt for the hypocritical manners of the upper class, a sentiment he condemned throughout his life. Tolstoy went on to study at Kazan University, but he soon grew disillusioned with the rigid curriculum and returned to his family estate, Yasnaya Polyana, after leaving school in 1847. During these years, he spent his time observing peasant life, experiencing reality firsthand, and engaging in introspection. This gradually shaped his profound humanistic thinking and compassion for the poor, a thread of thought that lasted throughout his later career. After his first trip abroad in the late 1850s, Tolstoy was exposed to many new ideas and returned to Russia with ideas about education, society, and culture. He opened a free school in Yasnaya Polyana based on the principle of respecting students' freedom, reflecting the progressive educational views he believed in. He also married Sofia Andreevna Bears in 1862, and this marriage brought him deep joy and personal stability, while also influencing the development of his thoughts on family and education.
Throughout his career, Tolstoy wrote many important short stories and novels, Youth, The Cossacks, Polikushta, etc., before reaching his peak with War and Peace, a vast epic, not only about the Napoleonic Wars, but also a profound study of Russian society, human life, and the nature of history. He viewed reason and the ego as the source of suffering, and emphasized sacrifice, the self-denial of the individual for the greater good of humanity, an idea deeply expressed in his work. Towards the end of his life, Tolstoy experienced a profound spiritual crisis. He realized that many literary works did not truly benefit the masses and began to turn towards a life of pure faith based on the spirit of the gospel. He experimented with forms of life close to that of the peasantry, manual labor, and wrote simple, humane stories as a way of preaching the spirit of love and service to humanity. Tolstoy is remembered not only as a great Russian writer, but also as a profound thinker on ethics, life, education, and humanity, whose influence on world literature and thought has lasted for a long time.
33. Friedrich Nietzsche, 1844 to 1900. Friedrich Wilhelm Nietzsche, born October 15, 1844, died August 25, 1900, was a German philosopher, cultural critic, and poet, considered one of the most influential thinkers of the 19th century and a pioneer of modern philosophy. His ideas profoundly impacted later philosophy, literature, art, psychology, and social studies. He is renowned for challenging the foundations of Christianity, traditional moral ethics, and Western rationalism, paving the way for existentialism and postmodernism. Nietzsche was born in Rücken, Germany, into a Protestant pastor's family. His father died when Nietzsche was very young. He displayed exceptional academic talent from a young age and was later admitted to the University of Bonn and then Leipzig University to study theology and philosophy. However, he soon abandoned theology to focus on ancient linguistics and philosophy. At the age of 24, Nietzsche was appointed professor of classical linguistics at the University of Basel, Switzerland, a very prestigious position for a young scholar. In his teaching career, Nietzsche began to develop his unique ideas. He abandoned traditional philosophical systems and classical metaphysical tendencies, instead developed a style of thinking that was profoundly critical of contemporary moral values, religion, and cultural identity. He questioned the basis and purpose of traditional moral norms, especially Christian moral values, which he believed stifled human vitality and creativity. One of the central tenets in Nietzsche's thought is the critique of traditional morality and the death of God, a phrase he used to describe the crisis of values in Western society when belief in God and the supernatural moral system was shaken. He believed that when God died, traditional values lost their foundation, leading to a state of emptiness in purpose and meaning without a new value system.
From this, Nietzsche proposed the concept of the Übermensch, or Superman, a model of human being who transcends the constraints of current societal values, freely creating his own values and living fully with his creative potential. He argued that humans are not merely products of traditional moral principles, but must transcend themselves to achieve a new, decisive, and creative form of existence. Nietzsche is also famous for his concept of the will to power. According to him, every living being has a tendency toward expressing and expanding its inner power, not merely to exist or survive. He argued that this power is the fundamental driving force behind action and creativity in life, transcending traditional moral concepts or reasoning. Another important theme in Nietzsche's thought is the critique of servile morality, norms formed by the weaker group to suppress the stronger group, which he called slave morality. He believed that slave morality impoverished and stifled human creative potential, while master morality celebrated power, creativity, and individual freedom. Towards the end of his life, Nietzsche faced prolonged periods of poor health and withdrew from teaching. In 1889, he suffered a mental breakdown and spent the rest of his life under the care of his mother and later his sister. Despite living a secluded life in his later years, Nietzsche's thoughts spread and profoundly influenced the 20th century, laying the foundation for many schools of thought such as existentialism, post-structuralism, psychoanalysis, and critical philosophy. His notable works include Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Beyond Good and Evil, The Genealogy of Morals, and The Birth of Tragedy. Through these works, Nietzsche not only criticized existing values, but also attempted to build a foundation for a new way of thinking, challenging readers to reflect on the meaning of life, self-determination, and individual creativity. Friedrich Nietzsche was a bold thinker who challenged conventional moral and intellectual frameworks to open up new possibilities for understanding and humanity, making him one of the loudest and most widely debated voices in the history of Western philosophy. He doesn't give us ready-made answers, but forces us to become the sculptors of our own lives. 34. Arthur Rimbaud, 1854 to 1891. Jean-Nicolas Arthur Rimbaud, born October 20, 1854, died November 10, 1891, was one of the most prominent French poets of the 19th century, renowned for his radical innovations in language and poetic sensibility. He is considered a pioneer of modern poetry and had a profound influence on many generations of poets who followed, despite his relatively short writing career in his youth, from the ages of 15 to 20. Rimbaud's poetry began to emerge through poems submitted to magazines when he was a teenager. In 1870, Rimbaud dropped out of school, wandered Paris, and joined the young literary circles, becoming involved with new movements and expressing uncompromising views on the old society. He sought out many writers and poets of the time, most notably Paul Verlaine, an author strongly attracted by Rimbaud's youthful talent. The relationship between Rimbaud and Verlaine quickly became passionate and chaotic, a creative and personal relationship fraught with conflict. Their lives were intertwined with alcohol, poetry, arguments, and wandering. One afternoon in 1873, in a fit of rage, Verlaine shot Rimbaud with a pistol, wounding him in the hand. The incident led to Verlaine's imprisonment and ended their relationship and creative collaboration.
However, this short but turbulent period of writing was the pinnacle of Rimbaud's poetry. He authored important collections such as Le Bateau Ivre, The Drunken Boat, Illuminations, and Une Saison en Enfer, A Season in Hell, in which he broke with old poetic rules and opened up many new, vivid, and evocative uses of language. Rimbaud's works often depict ambiguous, complex scenes and powerful emotions, transcending the traditional boundaries of French Romantic poetry of the time. In Le Bateau Ivre,
Rimbaud uses the image of a boat adrift at sea to express a state of mind that is both free and lonely, yearning for discovery and rebellion. Illuminations is a collection of prose poetry with rich imagery, sometimes astonishing due to its combination of language and sensations that seem both dreamlike and real. Meanwhile, Une saison en enfer is an autobiographical work speaking of inner conflicts, rebellion, and the desire to escape moral and social constraints. A distinctive feature of Rimbaud's poetry is its ability to break away from traditional rhythm and rhyme, instead using language as a direct tool to guide uninhibited emotions. He believed that poetry must transcend common logic to reach intuition and primal sensations in what he called the visual spirit, where the poet must transform sensation into new perception.
Rimbaud's literary career was very short. He stopped writing poetry before the age of 21, then left Paris, abandoned poetry, and wandered throughout Europe. Later, he became a businessman, trading extensively in Europe and Africa. People are often surprised that a poet as highly creative as Rimbaud would abandon literature at such a young age, but this also reflects his inherent thirst for freedom and his relentless search for the meaning of life. Rimbaud died on November 10, 1891, in Marseille, France, just weeks after being diagnosed with bone cancer. Despite his short poetic career, his influence was immense. Rimbaud became a symbol of modern poetry, a spirit of resistance and linguistic innovation, influencing generations of poets in the 20th century and beyond. Arthur Rimbaud is proof that art doesn't need a long time to leave its mark, but rather the intensity of emotion and the courage to break free from all limitations. He was the brightest shooting star in the literary firmament of the 19th century.
'35. Sigmund Freud, 1856 to 1939. Sigmund Freud, born May 6, 1856, died September 23, 1939, was an Austrian physician, neurologist, and thinker, considered the founder of psychoanalysis, a psychological treatment method and theory of the mind that profoundly influenced psychology, culture, and society in the 20th century. He completely changed how humanity understands the mind, behavior, and the hidden motivations behind human existence. Freud was born in Freiburg, now Pribor, Czech Republic, into a Jewish family. He studied medicine at the University of Vienna, where he graduated as a doctor of medicine in 1881 and later worked in neurology. Freud studied in Paris with Jean-Martin Charcot, who researched hysteria, then understood as a psychological disorder, and used hypnosis. From this time, he began to think that many mental disorders might stem from psychological factors rather than just physical trauma. From the late 1880s, Freud, along with his colleague Joseph Breuer, developed new techniques for psychotherapy. Most importantly, free association, a method allowing patients to express any ideas that came to mind without self-censorship in order to trace the unconscious conflicts that led to psychological symptoms. He also emphasized the role of transference in analysis, that is, the patient's emotions directed at the psychoanalyst, corresponding to important past relationships. A major turning point in Freud's career was his book The Interpretation of Dreams, 1900, where he proposed that dreams are a disguised expression of unconscious desires. He viewed the human psyche as being divided into different layers, especially the unconscious, where repressed desires, memories, and conflicts are stored, and believed that the mind exerts a significant influence on behavior, even if we don't realize it.
Freud also constructed a three-component structural model of the mind: the id, primitive instincts based on the pleasure principle; the ego, the self, the balance between desires and reality; and the superego, the moral consciousness, reflecting social norms, explaining how they interact to shape behavior and personality. He proposed that conflict between these forces causes anxiety and psychological defense mechanisms, such as the repression of painful memories. One of Freud's most controversial theories was his 3 essays on the theory of sexuality, 1905, in which he expanded the concept of sexuality beyond the adult realm and proposed stages of psychosexual development in humans from childhood, along with the concept of the Oedipus complex, the unconscious feeling of love for the opposite-sex parent and antagonism for the same-sex parent during childhood. In later works, such as Beyond the Pleasure Principle, 1920, Freud further discussed the death drive, a tendency toward negativity, repetition, and self-destruction, in addition to the life drive, libido. He also applied psychoanalysis to the analysis of culture, religion, and society in works such as The Future of an Illusion, 1927, and Civilization and Its Discontents, 1930, posing challenging views on religion, morality, and the nature of human civilization. In his personal life, Freud lived mostly in Vienna, where he practiced privately and taught. When the Nazis annexed Austria in 1938, he emigrated to London, where he died in exile in 1939. Freud was a controversial figure. Many scholars criticized his theories for their lack of solid scientific basis, particularly his concepts of child sexuality and psychological mechanisms. However, Freud's influence on psychology, culture, and art was profound and lasting, and many of his terms, such as the unconscious, the ego, and the Freudian slip, are still referenced in modern intellectual life.
'36. Vladimir Ilyich Lenin, 1870 to 1924. Vladimir Ilyich Lenin, born Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov, April 22, 1870, in Simbirsk, Russian Empire, died January 21, 1924, in Gorky, Soviet Union, was a Russian revolutionary, political theorist, and revolutionary leader, considered the founder of the Bolshevik Party, the main leader of the 1917 Russian Revolution, and the initiator of the Soviet state, the world's first communist state. He was one of the most influential political figures of the 20th century, and his ideas formed Leninism, a branch of Marxism that changed the global political landscape. Lenin was born into an educated family.
His father was an education official, and his mother came from an educated family. From a young age, Lenin was exposed to political ideas and was oriented towards revolution after his brother, Alexander Ulyanov, was executed for plotting to assassinate Tsar Alexander III in 1887. This event played a crucial role in formalizing Lenin's hatred of the Tsarist regime. He studied law, but was soon expelled from university for participating in the student movement and placed under house arrest. During this time, he read extensively on Marxist thought and officially became a Marxist. In the 1900s and 1905s, Lenin was actively involved in revolutionary activities, was arrested, and exiled to Siberia. There, he married Nadezhda Krupskaya, a like-minded revolutionary. After serving his sentence, he lived primarily in Europe, expanding his connections with Marxist groups and gradually emerging as the leader of the Bolshevik faction within the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party, a splinter group from the Russian Marxist movement, advocating a more aggressive struggle than the Mensheviks.
Lenin proposed the model of a proletarian vanguard party, a tightly organized, loyal, and highly disciplined revolutionary force to lead the working class in revolution. This ideology later became known as Leninism and became an integral part of Marxism-Leninism, the official ideology of the Soviet Union and many international communist movements. In October 1917, November, according to the old calendar, as Russia was mired in war and internal crisis following the February Revolution, Lenin and the Bolsheviks launched the October Revolution, overthrowing the provisional government of Alexander Kerensky and seizing control of the central government. The first Bolshevik government under Lenin immediately implemented many sweeping changes, including the declaration of peace, the return of land to peasants, the nationalization of property and enterprises, and the signing of the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk to end Russia's participation in World War I. In the Russian Civil War, 1918 to 1921, the Bolshevik government, led by Lenin, faced counter-revolutionary forces, the White Army, and numerous external interventionist powers. In response to the economic crisis and war, Lenin implemented war communism, a system of strict economic control, which later led to a production crisis and peasant uprisings. To address this situation, he promoted the New Economic Policy, NEP, from 1921. Allowing some forms of market economy to exist to revive production.
Lenin was also the founder of the Communist International, Comintern, an organization aimed at promoting proletarian revolutions worldwide. He firmly believed in the role of international revolution and constantly encouraged the communist movement from the Soviet Union. Lenin's health deteriorated from 1922 due to several strokes. He died in 1924 at the age of 53. His body was embalmed and placed in the Lenin Mausoleum in Red Square, Moscow, becoming a symbol of Soviet rule and attracting many visitors throughout the 20th century. Lenin is an extremely controversial historical figure. His supporters praise him for abolishing the Tsarist regime, promoting equality and workers' rights, and building a socialist model.
Meanwhile, critics condemn his establishment of a one-party dictatorship, the suppression of opposition, and the laying of the groundwork for later acts of violence and human rights violations in the name of defending the revolution. Lenin's influence extended beyond the Soviet Union to the communist movement and international politics for decades afterwards, making him one of the most pivotal and controversial figures of the 20th century. A master strategist, Lenin translated Marx's theories into vibrant political practice. He demonstrated that the will of a small, disciplined group could change the destiny of an entire empire.
37. Bertrand Russell, 1872 to 1970. Bertrand Arthur William Russell, born May 18, 1872, died February 2, 1970, was one of the greatest philosophers, logicians, mathematicians, and thinkers of the 20th century, as well as a renowned social and humanitarian activist. He was born in Trellick, Monmouthshire, Wales, into an English aristocratic family with a tradition of politics and scholarship. He grew up in a state of loss with the early deaths of his father, mother, and sister, and was raised by his grandmother, which profoundly influenced his life and thinking from a young age. Russell went to Trinity College, Cambridge University, to study mathematics and later switched to philosophy, where he began laying the foundation for his career in philosophy. Initially influenced by English idealism, he gradually abandoned it and promoted logical analysis, considering it the primary tool of philosophy, in contrast to traditional synthetic philosophical systems. Russell was one of the pioneers of the Anglo-American analytical philosophical tradition and had a profound influence on the development of logic, philosophy of language, and modern epistemology. One of Russell's most outstanding contributions is Principia Mathematica, 1910 to 1913, co-authored with Alfred North Whitehead, a monumental work in logic and mathematics. Through it, he and Whitehead attempted to build the entirety of mathematics on fundamental logical premises, demonstrating the ambition to prove that mathematics is a part of logic. Although later the mathematical and philosophical world shifted its thinking, Principia Mathematica remains one of the most influential works in the history of logic. Furthermore, Russell's essay On Denoting, 1905, is considered a standard in the philosophy of language because of its analysis of how descriptive definitions operate in logic and language.
In his intellectual career, Russell developed the concept of logical atomism, a theory that the world and language can be analyzed into the smallest parts, which are logical atoms. He also proposed many arguments in epistemology and the nature of knowledge, profoundly influencing later analytical philosophy. Russell was not only famous in academic circles, but also a strong social and political activist. During World War I, he opposed militarism and conscription, which led to him losing his teaching position at Cambridge and being sentenced to prison for a period for his anti-war activities. Afterward, he shifted to advocating socialism and social reform, writing extensively on education, ethics, marriage, and social issues.
He wrote works such as Principles of Social Reconstruction, Roads to Freedom, On Education, and Marriage and Morals, contributing to the dissemination of progressive ideas to the public.
Russell also opposed Soviet communism after his 1920 visit and expressed his profound criticism in The Practice and Theory of Bolshevism. After the war, he became a leading voice in the movement against nuclear weapons and war, particularly in his leadership of the campaign against nuclear proliferation and in international conferences on world security. He authored over 70 books and approximately 2,000 articles and was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1950, largely for his far-reaching contributions to philosophy, science, and the struggle for humanistic ideals, freedom of thought, and peace. Despite a career spanning nearly a century, Russell was always a sharp and argumentative voice, a highly opinionated intellectual who left an indelible mark on the intellectual, social, and political spheres. Bertrand Russell once summarized his life through 3 intense passions: the yearning for love, the pursuit of knowledge, and an unbearable empathy for the suffering of humanity. He was the epitome of a cold, sharp intellect coupled with a burning heart.
38. Albert Einstein, 1879–1955. Albert Einstein, born March 14, 1879, died April 18, 1955, was one of the greatest theoretical physicists in human history, widely known for reshaping the concept of space, time, and gravity with his theories of relativity. He was born into a Jewish family in Ulm, Württemberg, Germany, and grew up in a society undergoing significant transformation thanks to the Industrial Revolution and new scientific advances. His name is not only associated with science, but has also become a global symbol of genius and creativity. Einstein had a passion for mathematics and physics from a young age, although he struggled with the formal education system during his childhood and was even considered unremarkable at times. Early experiences with physical phenomena, such as questioning the compass needle, and exposure to science books formed the foundation for his independent thinking and strong intuition. After studying at the technical school in Zurich, now ETH Zurich, Einstein renounced his German citizenship and became a Swiss citizen. He graduated in 1900 and subsequently worked at the Swiss Patent Office in Bern. During this period, although not a formal lecturer or researcher, Einstein began producing a series of groundbreaking scientific works in 1905, often referred to as his miracle year, Annus Mirabilis. In 1905, Einstein published 4 important scientific papers, one explaining Brownian motion based on molecular motion, one introducing the quantum idea of light to explain the photoelectric effect, and 2 presenting the theory of special relativity, in which he introduced the concept of unified spacetime and the famous formula E equals mc squared, the equivalent of mass and energy. These papers laid the foundation for modern physics, giving birth to new branches of quantum physics and theoretical physics.
General relativity was a further development, published in 1915, describing gravity not as a force in flat space as Newton imagined, but as the curvature of space-time caused by mass. His prediction that light bends when passing near a massive object was confirmed in a solar eclipse in 1919, making Einstein world-famous as an icon of modern science. In 1921, Einstein won the Nobel Prize in Physics for explaining the photoelectric effect, not for his theories of relativity. This reflected the experimental certainty of his work, while relativity remained a subject of constant debate at the time. He continued to contribute to many other topics, such as quantum mechanics, unified field theory, though not entirely successful, and fundamental problems of cosmology. In the 1930s, as fascism rose in Germany, Einstein, now an international scholar, left Berlin and settled in Princeton, New Jersey, USA, where he worked at the Institute for Advanced Study until the end of his life. He also contributed a powerful voice on social and political issues, opposing fascism, advocating for civil rights, peace, and nuclear arms control. In the scientific world, Einstein's ideas created a true revolution. His theory of relativity and quantum work not only changed the way we view nature, but also profoundly influenced many fields, from modern technology, GPS, particle physics, to philosophy and how humans think about space and time. He is considered an icon of 20th century intellect. The image of Einstein, with his flowing hair and sharp eyes, has become a symbol of groundbreaking scientific ideas globally. Einstein died on April 18, 1955, in Princeton, New Jersey, USA, leaving a vast legacy in science and human thought, an endless source of inspiration for generations of scientists and those who love to discover the truth of nature.
'39. William Faulkner, 1927 to 1962. William Cuthbert Faulkner was an American writer with a unique style, renowned for his complex sentence structures, stream of consciousness techniques, and profound exploration of human psychology. He was the recipient of the 1949 Nobel Prize in Literature and 2 Pulitzer Prizes. William Cuthbert Faulkner, born September 25, 1897, died July 6, 1962, was one of the greatest novelists and short story writers of 20th century American literature, famous for his unique writing style, experimental storytelling techniques, and the construction of a fictional world with spiritual and historical depth. He was born in New Albany, Mississippi, and spent much of his life in Oxford, Mississippi, where he developed the fictional setting of Yoknapatawpha County, a cultural and social symbol of the American South that he used in many of his major works. He was the recipient of the 1949 Nobel Prize in Literature and 2 Pulitzer Prizes. Faulkner grew up in a rural southern region rich in historical traditions and social ties. He joined the Royal Canadian Air Force during World War I to fight, but the war ended before he completed his training. Then he studied for a few semesters at the University of Mississippi before dropping out to pursue a writing career. He began his career with poems and short stories, as well as early works such as Soldier's Pay, 1925.
Faulkner was an experimental writer.
He exploited the technique of stream of consciousness, describing the inner state of a character through continuous thought and multiple character perspectives, even within the same story, making the work's structure both rich and demanding of the reader's attention. This is evident in classics such as The Sound and the Fury, 1929, where the story of the Compson family is told through multiple characters with different voices and ways of thinking, creating a profound and challenging inner worldview. Soon after, he wrote As I Lay Dying, 1930, a multi-person novel about the Bundren family on their journey to bring their mother's body to her burial place. Faulkner developed the ability to tell stories with multiple voices and perspectives while maintaining a sense of local history and human condition in a context of poverty. This was followed by novels such as Light in August, 1932, and Absalom, Absalom, 1936. The latter work is often considered one of his greatest masterpieces, with its complex storytelling and deep exploration of themes of race, family, and personal identity in Southern history. Faulkner also wrote screenplays, worked in Hollywood, and contributed to numerous films in the 1930s and 1940s, including To Have and Have Not, 1944, and The Big Sleep, 1946. Two examples demonstrating the diversity of his writing and the interaction between literature and film at the time.
Although his initial American fame did not match that of Europe, Faulkner's career was widely revived after Malcolm Cowley selected and introduced the Portable Faulkner 1946, a collection that introduced the world of Yoknapatawpha to a new readership. This contributed to his 1949 Nobel Prize in Literature for a powerful and original contribution to the modern American novel. He was also a two-time Pulitzer Prize winner for fiction with A Fable, 1954, and The Reivers, 1963, his last novel published just before his death. Yoknapatawpha County, the fictional land Faulkner created, is not only a narrative setting, but also a historical and social symbol of the white American South, from the pain of war and racism to the deep internal conflicts of his characters. He blended indigenous, psychological, and historical elements to create stories that are both profoundly local and universally human. Faulkner died on July 6, 1962, of a heart attack in Byhalia, Mississippi, but his legacy lives on. He is considered one of the most influential writers of 20th century literature, with his experimental style, traditional yet innovative storytelling, and profound influence on subsequent American and international writers. Reading Faulkner is a challenging but worthwhile exploration into the deepest recesses of the human soul. 40. Ernest Hemingway, 1999 to 1961. Ernest Miller Hemingway, born July 21, 1899, died June 2, 1961, was one of the greatest American writers of the 20th century, renowned for his concise and impactful writing style and profound influence on modern literature. He was a novelist, journalist, short story writer, and war correspondent, and a cultural icon of the lost generation, those who experienced the spiritual void after World War I.
He was a quintessential representative of the lost generation, who redefined modern prose with his minimalist yet powerful writing style. Hemingway was born in Oak Park, Illinois, into a middle-class family. His parents encouraged their children's physical and intellectual development, and young Hemingway showed an early love for writing. When the United States entered World War I, Hemingway volunteered as an ambulance driver for the Italian Army, where he was severely wounded and received a medal for bravery, an experience that profoundly influenced his later writing style and themes. After the war, Hemingway worked as a correspondent in Europe and became a part of the American writing community in Paris during the 1920s, alongside figures like F. Scott Fitzgerald and Ezra Pound. This group was known as the Lost Generation, reflecting a sense of disillusionment and a search for meaning in the post-war world. Hemingway's literary style was distinctive. He used simple, concise language, avoided ornate language, and employed what he called the iceberg theory, according to which much of the meaning lies beneath the surface of the words, forcing the reader to sense what is not yet written. This style strongly influenced American and international literature in the 20th century. Hemingway wrote many works of high artistic value, the most famous of which include 1. In Our Time, 1924-1925, the first collection of short stories introducing Hemingway's style and themes such as war, loss, and post-war youth. 2. The Sun Also Rises, 1926, the novel that brought him fame, depicting the lives of young American and British people in Europe after the war, searching for joy amidst despair. 3. A Farewell to Arms, 1929, a love and war story based on Hemingway's own experiences in World War I. 4. To Have and Have Not, 1937, a social novel set in the American South and Cuba, reflecting Hemingway's experiences living in Key West and his support for the Republican side in the Spanish Civil War. 5. For Whom the Bell Tolls, 1940, a monumental work set against the backdrop of the Spanish Civil War, exploring themes of sacrifice, love, and the meaning of fighting. 6. The Old Man and the Sea, 1952, a famous short story about an old Cuban fisherman struggling with nature and fate. This work earned him the Nobel Prize in Literature for achievement in the art of storytelling and influence on contemporary literary style. Throughout his life, Hemingway also served as a war correspondent in various conflicts, including the Spanish Civil War and World War II, where he witnessed the liberation of Paris and the war situation. These experiences permeated his works.
Hemingway's literature often revolves around grand themes such as war, love, loss, sacredness, and resilience. His characters are often men facing intense challenges and seeking to maintain their dignity in harsh circumstances. Hemingway's writings often revolve around grand themes such as war, love, loss, sacredness, and resilience.
His characters are typically men facing intense trials and seeking to maintain their dignity in harsh circumstances. Hemingway's personal life was also full of paradoxes. He was famous for his adventurous spirit, passion for sports, hunting, and fishing. But he also experienced prolonged psychological and health crises, along with alcoholism and depression, which led him to take his own life on July 2, 1961, in Ketchum, Idaho. Ernest Hemingway's legacy lies not only in the vast number of works he left behind, but also in his influential literary style, which laid the foundation for many later writers and shaped modern American literature throughout the 20th century. Ernest Hemingway didn't just write, he lived his literature through blood and scars. He taught us that courage is maintaining composure even under pressure.
41. Jean-Paul Sartre, 1905 to 1980. Jean-Paul Charles Aimard Sartre, born June 21, 1905, died April 15, 1980, was one of the most prominent French philosophers, novelists, playwrights, and political activists of the 20th century, considered a central figure of existentialism, a philosophical and cultural movement that emphasizes freedom, choice, and individual responsibility. Sartre was born in Paris, France, and lost his father at a young age. He grew up primarily with his mother and maternal grandfather, who introduced him to culture and knowledge. He attended the prestigious École Normale Supérieure and graduated in philosophy in 1929, where he began to deeply engage with Western philosophical thought, including phenomenology and authors such as Henri Bergson, Edmund Husserl, and Martin Heidegger. During the 1930s, Sartre taught while also beginning his writing career. In 1938, he published the novel La Nausée, The Nausea, a work imbued with existential spirit about the disgust with existence that arises when humans realize the randomness of the world. This work explores the theme of existence before essence, meaning that humans are not born with a fixed nature, but create their nature through choices and actions. Sartre's philosophical culmination was his 1943 book, Being and Nothingness, L'être et le néant, in which he presented a logical system concerning freedom, consciousness, and the paradox of existence. He argued that human consciousness is not a definite substance, but rather a nothingness that allows humans to transcend circumstances and choose their own path in life, making each individual fully responsible for their own life.
After World War II, Sartre helped popularize existentialism through his lecture, Existentialism is a Humanism, 1946. In this work, he emphasized that freedom is not only a privilege, but also a burden, because the choice of values and actions defines a person. Each individual decision has a guiding meaning for all of humanity, because it reflects the way of life that person believes is right. Sartre was also active in literature and theater. He wrote many plays, such as No Exit, Use Clos, where the famous line, "Hell is other people," reflects the conflict between freedom and social interaction, and a series of novels in The Roads to Freedom that explore human life amidst a turbulent historical context.
Besides his roles as a philosopher and writer, Sartre was a prominent social and political activist. He opposed fascism during wartime, participated in the French resistance movement, and later became an important voice of the left in France, speaking out in support of national liberation movements against colonialism and war. He was once pro-Marxist, but also criticized forms of oppression, even those justified by political ideals, especially after the events in Hungary in 1956, when he rejected many orthodox communist viewpoints. In 1964, Sartre was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature for his thought-provoking works and spirit of freedom, but he refused to accept it, arguing that a writer should not turn himself into an institution. Jean-Paul Sartre died on April 15, 1980, in Paris. He left a profound intellectual legacy that influenced philosophy, culture, sociology, and literary criticism as a symbol of individual freedom, moral responsibility, and the power of human choice in a complex and uncertain world.
'42. Albert Camus, 1913 to 1960. Albert Camus, born November 7, 1913, died January 4, 1960, was one of the greatest writers, philosophers, journalists, and playwrights of the 20th century, widely known for his literary works that combined profound thought and humanistic vision. He was born in Mondovi, Algeria, then French territory, into a poor working-class family. His father died in World War I, and the family later lived with his mother and grandmother in a working-class neighborhood in Algiers. His childhood experiences, amidst poverty, the Mediterranean climate, and the bright sunlight of Algeria, profoundly influenced his writing style and philosophy of life. Although often grouped with existentialism, he considered himself a philosopher of absurdity. In 1957, he became one of the youngest recipients of the Nobel Prize in Literature. Camus studied philosophy at the University of Algiers, but tuberculosis prevented him from pursuing further studies. He began writing research and criticism in the 1930s, publishing collections of essays such as L'Envers et l'Entroit, 1937, and Nos, 1938, in which he explored the beauty of nature, the fragility of human life, and the absurdity of existence. These essays reveal an early awareness of absurdism, one of the pillars of thought Camus pursued throughout his writing career. Camus' thought is often placed within the context of absurdism, the belief that the world does not have the profound meaning that humans expect, but that humans must live with this absurdity with courage and dignity. This concept becomes most clearly expressed in his philosophical essay Le mythe de Sisyphe, The Myth of Sisyphus, 1942, where he uses the image of Sisyphus perpetually pushing a stone up a hill only to see it roll back down, symbolizing a meaningless, repetitive life, yet humanity perseveres in its freedom and self-creation of value. Camus is world-renowned for his deeply philosophical fiction, of which L'étranger, The Stranger, 1942, is the most prominent. This novel tells the story of Meursault, a man indifferent to fate, judged by society for his lack of proper emotion, and profoundly reflects the notions of absurdity, alienation, and the confrontation with death. La Peste, The Plague, 1947, is another symbol,
depicting the city of Oran under lockdown by a plague, through which Camus explores the themes of suffering, solidarity, and human dignity amidst crisis. La Chute, The Fall, 1956, is a profound moral novel set in Amsterdam, arguing about judgment, guilt, and conscience. Besides the novel, Camus also wrote L'Homme Révolté, The Rebellious Man, 1951, a major essay outlining his views on resistance, justice, and freedom, criticizing both revolutionary violence and unprincipled compromise, leading to a famous disagreement with Jean-Paul Sartre and several Marxists on the role of revolution in modern society.
Camus actively participated in the anti-fascist resistance movement during World War II, working as a reporter and editor for the newspaper Combat. After the war, he continued to speak out strongly about justice, individual liberty, and human rights, opposing capital punishment and all forms of oppression. He also had a complex view of the Algerian War, with a more humanistic and cautious perspective than many contemporary intellectuals. In 1957, at the age of 44, Albert Camus was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature for his works, which he said brought light to the problems of human conscience in our time. He humbly stated that if he were a member of the awarding committee, he would vote for someone else instead of himself. Camus died on January 4, 1960, in a car accident near Sens, France. Despite his short life, his legacy, through his poetry, essays, and philosophical works, lives on as a symbol of courage in the face of absurdity, human dignity, and spiritual resistance, continuing to inspire readers and thought worldwide. He is proof that humans can master their destiny by refusing to succumb to it.
43. Arthur Miller, 1915 to 2005. Arthur Asher Miller, born October 17, 1915, died February 10, 2005, was one of the most prominent American playwrights of the 20th century, widely known for his humanistic plays that deeply reflected personal conflict, moral responsibility, and the challenges faced by individuals under social pressures. He was born in Harlem, New York, to a Jewish family of Polish descent. His parents immigrated from Europe and built a small clothing business before losing almost all their possessions during the Great Depression of the 1930s. This experience shaped Miller's sharp thinking about social unrest and human moral values. Miller attended the University of Michigan, where he began writing plays as a student and won the Avery Hopwood Award for his debut play, No Villain. He continued to write many works before embarking on a professional career, and during World War II he also worked various jobs before his works were staged on Broadway. The major turning point in Miller's career came with All My Sons, 1947, a play reflecting the moral conflict within a family and post-war society. This work earned him a Tony Award for Best Writer, solidifying his position in American theater. Following that success was Death of a Salesman, 1949, considered one of the most important plays of 20th century American theater. The play depicts the tragedy of Willie Loman, an aging salesman who has failed in life and harbors illusions of the American dream, to the point of self-destruction in the hopes of bringing some solace to his family. The work placed the ordinary man at the center of tragedy, a novel approach to classical drama, and won the Pulitzer Prize for Drama and several Tony Awards.
Another iconic play by Miller is The Crucible, 1953, based on the 17th century Salem witch trials, but a profound allegory of the McCarthy era in 1950s America, when anti-communist investigations turned into a senseless identity hunt. Through it, Miller criticized collective fear, imposition, and the danger of destroying humanity when society is swept along by a paranoid mob. During the same period, he wrote several other plays, such as A View from the Bridge, 1955, telling the tragic story of an Italian migrant worker pushing themes of justice, jealousy, and personal responsibility, as well as After the Fall, 1964, a deeply autobiographical play reflecting the relationships and pain following McCarthyism and the Holocaust. Miller also ventured into the world of screenwriting, most notably The Misfits, 1961, which he wrote himself, starring his then-wife Marilyn Monroe alongside Clark Gable. He continued to write short stories, screenplays, and essays, imbued with an awareness of moral responsibility and social issues. In real life, Miller was summoned before the House Un-American Activities Committee, HUAC, in 1956 during the hunt for suspected communists. He refused to name other writers who had previously participated in anti-fascist writing organizations, an act that led to him being accused of contempt of Congress, although he later successfully appealed.
In the later stages of his literary career, Miller wrote many more works, such as The Price, 1968, The American Clock, 1980, a series of short plays based on aspects of American life during the Great Depression, and Resurrection Blues, 2002. He also received numerous major awards, such as the Kennedy Center Honors, the Premium Imperiale, and the Jerusalem Prize for his enduring contributions to theater and culture. Arthur Miller died on February 10, 2005, in Roxbury, Connecticut, leaving a vast legacy in world theatrical literature, with works that are not only dramatic stories, but also insightful reflections on humanity, society, and moral values that are constantly wavering throughout the ages. The above is a brief summary of 43 of the most influential thinkers of all time in human history. Please listen and subscribe to the channel to continue watching our next videos.